Okay, thank you very much. So let me share my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so in our morning session, I highlighted the role of the thesis advisor in the advising process, particularly in the proposal stage. We discussed the importance of advising, of course, and the role of advisor in the advising process, and at the same time, we mentioned some important points, like for example, how to conceptualize properly the introduction of the proposal, and at the same time the importance of research framework, okay, in a particular research undertaking. Another aspect that I want to emphasize also is the importance of literature review. Okay, in our traditional format, the literature review is chapter 2 or the second chapter of our thesis or our dissertation. Okay, but if we will be considering, for example, the IMRAD format, which is the typical format for journal articles, the literature review is basically part of the introduction. Okay, so how do we go about in the literature aspect or in the literature section of our thesis or dissertation? When we talk about literature review, when we say review, it means we are critically evaluating prior studies. It means we try to identify some related studies or some related literature that has or that can impact, okay, our research undertaking. We mentioned a while ago that in a particular research study, we need to establish our research framework. We also mentioned the importance of identifying our hypotheses or hypotheses, which are reflected in our research framework. Now, these things are also very vital simply because these things are also very important in reviewing the literature. Okay, so if we will be going back with our example a while ago, the one that I presented in the morning session. So we mentioned that, for example, if this is the introduction or the flow of the introduction of the students, after identifying the introduction, the students should identify the research framework and come up with both the theoretical and conceptual framework. And we mentioned in the research framework, each arrow represents a particular research hypothesis. Ibig sabihin, once we identified our framework, okay, sa framework dapat natin nagmamanifest na yung mga hypothesis. Because if you will be looking the definition of a conceptual framework is a figure or a diagram that shows the totality, okay, of our study. We also mentioned that in our conceptual framework or in our research framework in general, kailangan naka-embed na yung theoretical underpinning or theoretical frameworks na gagamitin natin in our study. Now, what is the significance of this in the literature review? In the literature review, you do not simply summarize past studies. Okay? Hindi natin sinasummarize ang past studies. What is the purpose of literature review? The purpose of literature review is one, we need to discuss all constructs used in the study. So it means in our study, there must be a thorough explanation of each of the construct that you utilize in the study. So let's say in this case, kung titignan natin yung title and or topic, there are variables here such as environmental sustainability awareness, altruism, green purchase intention, and brand evangelism. So it means in your paper, these constructs or these variables should be thoroughly explained in the literature review section. So in the literature review section, we need to explain or discuss all constructs of the study. And number two, the purpose why we have literature review is basically to explain and justify all our research hypotheses. In short, in our literature review, if for example, if we have five hypotheses rather, these hypotheses are properly explained and properly justified. Okay? If you still remember the definition of a hypothesis is a scientific guess. Okay? And when we talk about hypothesis, tinetest natin ang hypothesis. But in the formulation or in the establishment of our research hypothesis, we need to properly justify or explain why we came up with those research hypotheses. Okay? And those justifications should be found in chapter 2 or in the literature review section of your paper. Okay? So magbigay lang ako ng example. Okay? So in this case, if you will be looking at this paper, balikan ko lang yung previous slide. If we will be looking at this paper, in this conceptual framework or in this research model, meron tayong 4 major variables or constructs. So we have environmental sustainability, green purchase intention, and green brand evangelism. And at the same time, we introduce the concept of altruism in the research framework. Okay? And if you will be looking at this framework, meron tayong 4 major variables. These 4 major variables or constructs should be thoroughly explained, okay, in the chapter 2 or the literature review section of our study. We need to find studies that explains what environmental sustainability awareness is all about, the concept of altruism, the concept of green purchase intention, and the concept of green brand evangelism. Number 2, in the literature section, we need to justify all the hypotheses that you have identified. Ibig sabihin, if we have 5 hypotheses such as this, like for example, let's say in our hypothesis 1, we want to test whether environmental sustainability is significantly and positively related to green purchase intention. So here we want to test whether meron bang relation yung environmental sustainability ng mga respondents to their green purchase intention. So you need to justify that hypothesis in the literature review section. Same is true with hypothesis 2. Okay, where we want to justify or we want to substantiate whether environmental sustainability awareness is significantly and positively related to altruism. Okay? And number 3, altruism is significantly and positively related to green purchase intention. For number 4, green purchase intention is significantly and positively related to green brand evangelism. And number 5, altruism mediates the significant and positive relationship between environmental sustainability awareness and green purchase intention. So you will see here, all these 5 hypotheses should be substantiated in the literature review section. So in the literature review, once you presented your chapter 2, this things must be present. The explanation and discussion of the constructs used in the study, and number 2, the justification of each research hypothesis. Okay? So these are the things na kailangan mag-manifest sa ating chapter number 2. So if I will be giving you an actual chapter 2, magbigay lang ako ng example like this one. This is the actual literature review section of my students in her paper, in the proposal paper. So you will see here, yung first paragraph niya talks about environmental sustainability awareness. So she provided ample discussion on environmental sustainability awareness in order for the reader to have the idea of what environmental sustainability awareness is all about. Okay? Number 2, she presented the second variable, which is green purchase intention. So here she mentioned about green purchase intention and the different explanations and discussions about green purchase intention. In this case also, okay, so you will see here in this slide, the second variable or the second construct was also explained, green purchase intention. And you will see in our first hypothesis, the first hypothesis postulates that environmental sustainability awareness is significantly and positively related to green purchase intention. So ito yung first hypothesis natin. We want to know kung meron bang relation ang environmental sustainability awareness sa green purchase intention. Okay? So you will see here the initial paragraphs of the literature review talks about environmental sustainability awareness and green purchase intention. Then it was followed by justification, okay? Justification why this hypothesis was established. So you will see here, ang gusto ko lang emphasize dito, every time we write the literature review section, we do not let students simply summarize prior studies. Okay? Hindi siya parang diary that they summarize. Okay? Lahat ng related studies. No. The literature review is there in order for us to critically examine past studies, in order for us to explain the constructs of the study and justify, okay, our research hypothesis or research hypothesis. So you will see here, okay, etong dalawang paragraphs na to, these two paragraphs justify, okay, why hypothesis 1 was established. Okay? Kaya very, very clearing dito sa last paragraph dito, sabi niya, hence it is hypothesized that. Okay? So there must be justification for each of the hypotheses. Okay? So next, you will see here naman, diniscuss niya yung third variable. So the third variable or the third construct is altruism. So she defined what altruism is, and at the same time, she justified, okay, the second hypothesis. Ano ba yung second hypothesis natin? Environmental sustainability awareness is significantly related to altruism. Okay? So here, you need to justify bakit posible ang relationship or posible yung significant and positive relation sa altruism ng mga respondents. Okay? So you will see here, the researcher identified prior studies on the formation of altruism due to environmental sustainability awareness. Okay? And if you will be looking at the other parts of this literature review, the third hypothesis talks about the relationship or the significant and positive relationship of altruism on green purchase intention naman. Okay? So this paragraph justified why altruism can be a factor of green purchase intention. Okay? Then, if you will be scrolling down again, meron tayong green evangelism. Okay, so she introduced the fourth variable, which is green evangelism, and the paragraph here justified the fourth hypothesis, which is green purchase intention. Okay, and its effect, okay, on brand evangelism. Okay, so as I mentioned, all hypotheses must be properly justified. Okay. Then same is true also with H5, which is we want to know whether altruism mediates the significant and positive relationship between environmental sustainability awareness and green purchase intention. So all these paragraphs here, itong tatlong paragraphs na to justify our hypothesis. Okay, or our fifth hypothesis. Okay? So kung titingnan natin, okay, kung titingnan natin yung chapter 2 ng thesis or dissertation ng proposal ng ating estudyante, okay, ang chapter 2 dapat siya, it should be rich with explanation, okay, and discussion of the constructs used in the study, and at the same time, there must be paragraphs that justify each of the hypotheses you identified in your study. Okay, so that's the purpose of our literature review in our chapter number 2. Okay. Now, another important aspect ng proposal natin is once na na-establish na natin yung ating introduction, yung ating framework, and at the same time, nalaman na natin yung hypothesis natin, okay? This is the right time now to properly identify paano natin ito translate yung hypothesis natin into problem statements. Okay? As I always say, the hypothesis should be in consonance with the problem statement or the statement of the problem. So if you will be reading, for example, okay, if you will be reading this four statement of the problem, this first statement of the problem should be in consonance with the hypothesis or hypothesis of the study. Okay, so let's try to quickly analyze this one. So if we will be reading the first statement of the problem here, how does environmental sustainability awareness influences green purchase intention and altruism? So you will see here, ang first question, gusto nyo malaman yung influence daw ng environmental sustainability awareness. Okay, environmental sustainability awareness on green purchase intention and altruism. So saan nagre-reflect yung statement problem number 1? So basically for statement number 1, ito yon, this is stage 1. This is actually hypothesis 1, and at the same time, hypothesis 2. Because in our hypothesis 1 and 2, sinasabi niya dito, we hypothesize that environmental sustainability awareness is significantly and positively related to green purchase intention, and sa hypothesis 2, related to altruism. So you will see here hypothesis 1 and 2 are reflected in our statement of the problem, statement problem number 1. Number 2, kung titignan naman natin yung problem statement number 2, how does altruism affect consumer purchase intention? So here we want to know whether altruism can affect green purchase intention. So saan natin makikita yan? That is basically hypothesis 3. In our hypothesis 3, we want to know whether altruism is significantly and positively related to green purchase intention. Then for number 3 here, how does green purchase intention lead to green brand evangelism? Okay, so here we want to know the relation of green purchase intention and green brand evangelism. So that is basically age 4. Okay, so that is green purchase intention is significantly and positively related to green brand evangelism. And of course, for question number 4, how does altruism indirectly, this is indirectly affect, or how does altruism indirect affect? It should be indirectly affecting the relationship. Okay, correct ko lang to, indirectly affecting the relationship between environmental sustainability awareness and green purchase intention. So for statement number 4, basically this is our hypothesis number 5. So in our hypothesis number 5, we want to hypothesize that altruism mediates the significant and positive relationship between environmental sustainability awareness and purchase intention. So you will see here, kailangan parallel din or naka-align yung ating statement of the problem and yung ating research hypothesis. Okay? So that is the part na very important sa ating research undertaking, particularly sa proposal ng ating mga estudyante. Okay? So that is chapter number 2. Okay, 1 and 2. Okay? The next part that I want to discuss, of course, if you still remember sa proposal stage, the last part na sinasubmit sa atin ng mga estudyante natin is the method section. Okay? In the method sections, ano ang kailangan mag-manifest dyan? Of course, in the method sections, there are 3 important aspects that should be manifesting in our chapter number 3. Ano yung pinaka-importante? Of course, number 1, participants of the study. Number 2, the research instrument. And number 3, the data analysis section. Okay? Of course, mas maraming subsections pa yan. But I think these are the 3 important aspects ng ating chapter number 3. Okay? So in the participants of the study, we must know sino ang ating respondents and why they are the appropriate respondents. We need to identify also what's our sampling technique and how we will be calculating our sample size and the sufficiency of the sample size. Particularly if your study is a quantitative research, because a quantitative research relies heavily on survey instrument and at the same time the sample size. Okay? Number 2, under research instrument, we need to identify, of course, what is our research instrument? Did we adapt with O, adapt with A, or create a new research instrument? And how did we measure the construct? Did we use 5-point Likert scale, 6-point Likert scale, 7-point Likert scale, so on and so forth? So those should be explained properly under the section research instruments. And number 3, under data analysis, there must be clarity on what research design you will be utilizing in your paper and at the same time the statistical treatment that you will be using in your paper, particularly if your paper is a quantitative research or it is a paper that is quantitative in nature. Okay? Now, let me discuss the importance of research design. In quantitative research, typically we have the 3 commonly used research design. We have what we call descriptive, we have correlational, and we have comparative. So just to briefly explain each of these research design, when we talk about descriptive research design, we are talking about here the description of a phenomenon or a situation. It usually answers the question what, where, when, and how. Okay, and at the same time, in a descriptive research design, we typically use descriptive statistics. Okay, so for example, let's say a study that talks about the level of tourist satisfaction in a destination. So for example, your study has something to do with the measurement of the level of satisfaction of your respondents in a particular destination, then you can use what we call descriptive research design. Okay. Number two, we also have what we call correlational studies. Okay. So correlational research design is a type of research design where we want to establish if there is relationship between or among variables. Okay. So for instance, let's say you want to know the relationship of salary and job satisfaction of BPO employees. So gusto mong malaman kung meron bang relation yung level ng salary ng isang BPO employee sa kanyang level ng job satisfaction. So since you want to establish relationship between salary and job satisfaction, then the appropriate research design to you is a correlational research design. Okay? Then of course, the last typical research design is what we call comparative. So when we talk about comparative here, it means we want to compare two or more things. For example, let's say you want to establish if there is a significant difference in employee satisfaction between male and female workers. So let's assume you want to know meron bang pagkakaiba yung job satisfaction ng mga empleyado between male and female. Okay, so this is an example of a study that utilized comparative research design. Okay, so very important also to guide properly our students on what type of research design they will be utilizing. Of course, today may mga advanced research design tayo, like for example, yung paggamit ng causal predictive approach or simply predictive approach. Okay, so these are also emerging techniques now in quantitative research, particularly business research, yung mga causal predictive approaches as part of the research design. So we need to help our students on how to properly identify the research design. Research design is very important, especially if our aim is to publish a research paper, because one of the major considerations of a reviewer in evaluating a particular research undertaking is the appropriateness of the research design for the study. Okay? So tinitingnan nila kung na-justify mo ng tama na iyon ang tamang research design para sa ganung klase ng pananaliksik. Okay? So that is the importance of what we call research design. Okay? If you will be asking you, for example, which of the three type of research design will require you to test hypothesis? Okay? So, sino sa tatlong ito ang nagre-require ng hypothesis testing? The answer would be correlational and comparative. Okay? So, if your study is correlational or comparative, expect mo that you will be testing hypothesis here. And of course, do not expect hypothesis kung ang study mo is purely descriptive. Okay? If you still remember in statistics, okay, sa statistics natin, meron tayong tinatawag natin descriptive and differential statistics. So when we talk about descriptive statistics, this is the use of basically, for example, frequency, percentage, yung mga summary measures natin. Okay, so those kinds of statistical tests, they fall under descriptive statistics. Okay, on the other hand, inferential statistics, yung mga different tests dito are used for hypothesis testing. Like for example, if you will be testing differences like test of difference in terms of satisfaction among year levels, or for example among let's say based on position in the organization. Okay, so we use inferential statistics for hypothesis testing, whether you will be testing differences or you are testing relationships. Okay, so very important ito. There must be parallelism dun sa statistical test na gagamitin mo and yung research design na gagamitin mo. So if balikan ko lang yung previous slide, as I mentioned, kung let's say ang research design ng estudyante magpo-fall siya, for example, sa descriptive research design. Then, kung gagamit ka ng statistical test, ang gagamitin mo dapat mga descriptive statistics. On the other hand, if you will be using correlational and comparative, then this will be the time that you will be using statistical test that falls under inferential statistics. Okay? So that's the difference between the two, between the three research designs. Okay? So as I mentioned, descriptive statistics is a branch of statistics that describe, show, and summarize our data. Okay, while for inferential statistics, we make inferences about the population. Okay, so if we will be testing the hypothesis, okay, ang ginagamit natin dyan inferential statistics. If we want to simply describe our data, then we use descriptive statistics. Kaya kapag ang study ng estudyante natin, correlational or comparative, or for example, causal predictive, do not rely on the do not require the students to explain and provide ample discussions, particularly sa results section, na purely descriptive ang kanyang output. Okay? Kasi kapag ang ginamit niyang research design, correlational, comparative, and let's say causal, predictive, hypothesis-based yan. So expect natin ang results dapat niyan inferential, hindi descriptive. Vice versa, if the study is purely descriptive, huwag nating hanapan ang estudyante natin ng mga statistical test that falls under this inferential. Kailangan ng statistical test na ginagamit dyan, descriptive statistics. Okay? So very important yon. Okay? Kasi I notice kasi kapag nagpa-panel tayo, lagi natin hinahanap descriptive. Yung mga descriptive statistics like frequency, percentage. Ang kailangan nating tignan dapat, ano ba ang research design niya? Kasi ang research design naka-anchor dapat yan sa purpose ng study. Okay? Kung hindi descriptive ang research design ng estudyante at ang kanyang study has something to do with hypothesis testing, wag natin siyang hanapan ng maramihang explanation doon sa descriptive. Ang explanation niya dapat is heavy on hypothesis testing. Okay? So that is the importance of identifying the appropriate research design. Okay? Next, very important din yung pag-identify natin or pag-calculate natin ng sample size. Under the participants of the study section, we usually provide or we usually identify here sino yung participants and we explain bakit sila ang participants and also we estimate yung ating sample size. Of course, there are variety of ways now to estimate our sample size. It is not only Slovenes. Slovenes formula, if you will be reading the paper of Tejada and Punzalan, kapag binasa mo yung paper nila, makikita mo ang daming limitations ng Slovenes formula. Personally, I do not use Slovenes formula. I use other techniques kasi there are a lot of emerging techniques now on how we can estimate our sample size. Okay? Let's have typical example. The most common use to calculate the sample size is the use of Rausoff. Okay, so Rausoff is a online sample size calculator. It is free, libre lang yan. In Rausoff, ang kailangan mong malaman dyan is kailangan mong malaman yung population size mo para mag-recommend siya ng minimum sample size. Okay? So Rausoff as a sample size calculator, ang kanyang input na hinahanap will always be the population size. Kung saan mo kukunin yung sample mo. So for example, let's say your respondents will be, for example, students of PUP Manila. So kailangan meron kang data on the population of PUP Manila para magbigyan kanya ng minimum sample size ng Rausoff. Okay? So that is, this is a way to calculate also our sample size. Of course, if you will be looking the internet, marami pang mga sample size calculator. Like for example, surveysystem.com. If you will be going here, may mga sample size calculators din sila, similar with Rausoff. Meron din si Qualtrics. If you want to use the sample size calculator of Qualtrics, you can also use the sample size calculator of calculator.net. Okay? So yung mga pinakita ko mga sample size calculators, they rely heavily on the figure on total population. Okay? So in order for you to compute your sample size, kailangan mo munang malaman ang inyong population or the population size. Okay? The other ways on how we can estimate our sample size is through the use, for example, of G-Power. G-Power is a free application. It is a free tool in order for us to measure also the minimum recommended sample size for a particular study. The difference between G-Power and the sample size calculator that I presented, G-Power will not require you to have the knowledge on the total population. Rather, G-Power relies heavily on what type of statistical test you will be using, the effect size that you want to establish, the alpha level, and the power level. Okay? So what does it mean? The G-Power is basically a way to calculate the minimum sample size based on statistical power. Okay? So ang calculation ng sample size niya, nakadepende siya kung anong statistical test ang gagamitin mo, ano yung effect size na gusto mong i-measure, ano yung alpha level, and yung power, statistical power na gusto mong ilagay or gamitin in your study. Okay? So for example, this one, in this illustration, you will see kung ang gagamitin mo daw is correlation point by serial model, then yung effect size na gusto mo is 0.3, ang alpha level mo is 0.5, and gusto mong mataas na power level na 95%, then ang recommended sample size niya is 111 or 111. Okay? Always remember pala, every time we calculate or estimate our sample size, ang sample size na kinakalculate niya is the minimum sample size. Okay? Ibig sabihin, minimum, pinakamaliit na sample size. Okay? But in your actual study, of course, you can go beyond. It is advisable to go beyond the minimum sample. Okay? Remember, this is the minimum only. Pwede kang kumuha ng mas malaki pa dyan, which is better. Okay? So that is G-Power. Okay? There are also other techniques like yung kung ginagamit, the use of inverse square root method and the use of gamma exponential method, which was introduced by Kak and Hadaya. Okay, so this is a newer technique now on how we can estimate the sample size. Same with G-Power, ang inverse square root method and gamma exponential method do not rely heavily on the total population. Rather, it relies heavily on statistical power. Okay, so inverse square root method and gamma exponential method are the new techniques also on how we can calculate the sample size and the sufficiency of the sample size. So currently, ang gamma exponential method and the inverse square root method are only available in the software called WarPLS. Okay, so this is the only software now that calculates inverse square root method and gamma exponential method. So kung titingnan mo itong sample na to, I just screenshot this one from one of my published papers. In this case, you will see ang recommended sample size ni inverse square root is 117, while the recommended sample size of gamma exponential is 104. So it means the minimum sample size na pwede kong gamitin dito nasa around 104 to 117. Pero as I mentioned, when we say minimum, this is only the minimum. You can always go beyond the minimum, which is also advisable. Okay? So this is a technique also on how we can calculate our sample size. Okay? Next is also our research instruments. Okay, in our research instruments, there are two things that I want to emphasize here. Number one, you need to, of course, cite, okay, and mention saan mo galing yung mga items to measure a particular construct. So you need to properly cite them in the research instrument section of the research method or the chapter 3 of our paper. Number two, the research instrument also should have validity and reliability measurements. It means we need to measure both validity and reliability for our research instrument. Okay? Of course, in this section, we also need to identify what type of scale did we use, okay, para alam ng nagbabasa kung gumamit ba tayo ng 5-point Likert scale, 6-point Likert scale, and so on and so forth. Okay, so when we talk about validity and reliability, I am referring to Cronbach's alpha, CA, and composite reliability. Okay, these are the two commonly measures of reliability. Ano ang purpose ng reliability test? The purpose of reliability test is basically to measure the internal consistency of the items of our latent variables. Okay? It means kung for example, gusto mong ma-assure na reliable yung mga items na ginamit mo to measure a particular latent construct, for example, let's say job satisfaction, then there must be test of reliability para malaman natin kung yung mga items exhibit internal consistency. Okay? Number two, we also have validity tests. Validity tests, statistically speaking, can be measured via discriminant validity and convergent validity. Why do we need to prove that our instrument is valid? Simply because validity test will measure whether the designer of the questionnaire or the designer of the research instrument have the same understanding with the respondent in terms of the contents of the research instrument itself. Ibig sabihin, ang validity test using discriminant validity and convergent validity assures na naintindihan ng respondents yung mga items na ginawa ni designer ng instrument. Okay? Part of validity test also measure yung level ng confusion. Kapag mababa ang validity, ibig sabihin posibleng nanghula ang mga respondents or hindi nila naintindihan yung mga items kaya nanghula sila. Yun ang mga possibilities. Okay? Kaya mine-measure natin yung validity ng ating research instrument. Okay? Then for data analysis, it is also very important to identify kung anong research design natin. Like this one, I particularly mentioned quantitative using causal research approach. Okay? Then I identified also here ano yung statistical test na gagamitin. Okay? And of course, very important also in the data analysis to have a brief explanation kung ano yung statistical test mo, and at the same time why that statistical test is the appropriate statistical test, okay, for your study. Okay? So very important din yan dun sa research method sections. Okay? Okay. So before I'll proceed, stop share muna ako. And if you have any questions so far, you can raise muna yung mga questions kasi next will be instrument naman. Research instrument. Okay, any question or clarification so far?
Okay, may question po ba? Doc Lakap will entertain your question first before he will continue his discussion. Any question? You may opt to unmute po.
Yes, ma'am, Griselda.
Yes, ma'am. Doc Rante, you are recognized po.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon po.
Now, yes, you just discussed about the sample size. So, the minimum sample size. What if in the actual presentation now, the research, the minimum sample size was not met? What is the implication of that in the final decision regarding the presented thesis?
Okay. The minimum sample size is very important, particularly if we are doing quantitative research. That's the reason in the proposal stage, it should be clear from the onset of what is the minimum sample size. Like for example, let's say based on the calculation, let's say gumamit po tayo ng G power, and let's say sabi ng G power, ang minimum sample size is 250 for that particular type of research. Of course, the researcher should meet the minimum of 250. If for example, ang kanyang sample size sa actual study niya, let's say nag-gather na siya ng data at hindi niya naabot yung minimum sample size, meron bang implications yun? Definitely yes. Okay? Because one, kapag hindi po na-meet yung minimum sample size, kasi ang minimum sample size, mini-measure niya yung sufficiency ng sample size. Particularly yung diniscuss ko na last approach on how to estimate yung inverse square root and gamma exponential method. Ibig sabihin, kapag hindi sufficient ang sample size, it means magsasuffer yung conclusion natin. We cannot fully establish now whether the claims of our hypothesis testing will be valid. Okay? Kaya from the onset, it is a must for the student to measure first, okay, yung minimum sample size so that they have the idea, okay, on the number of sample that they will be getting from the data collection. Okay? So bago po dapat isa lang na i-process yung data, kailangan naka-assure na tayo na yung minimum sample size na meet, okay, para masabi natin na yung magiging conclusions and results ng study, they are valid and sound results.
So this is just a follow-up, sir. So we have we assigned statisticians to our proponents, no, to our students. Now, who will tell the student that your sample size was not met, so you have to, para hindi na siya mag-proceed doon sa final defense. So
Okay.
dapat doon pa lang sa point na yon, nasabihan na siya na hindi sapat ito.
Yeah. Actually, ma'am, if we will be considering the advising process, in the advising process, di ba po, sa proposal paper, research proposal paper ng estudyante, they are submitting proposal up to chapter 3, yung methods. And in the methods, nandun yung respondents of the study. Okay? In that case, kailangan na-identify na yung sample size. As I mentioned, if you will be asking me, for example, kung paano ma-establish yung minimum sample size, there are different ways. Actually, even students can do that personally. Kasi madali lang gamitin ng different applications. Like, for example, the sample size calculators na available online for free, or for example, the G-Power, madali lang siyang gamitin. And even yung advanced technique like inverse square root method and gamma exponential methods. These methods can be done by the students kung alam nila yung mga assumptions ng mga to. Kaya very important yung pag-calculate natin ng sample size beforehand. So bago pa isalang yung data natin into a particular data analysis test, like yung paggamit ng statistical test, kailangan naka-establish na yung sample size natin kung enough na siya o hindi.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you for that question, ma'am. Anyone pa po from the meeting room would like to ask questions from our speaker before he proceeds to his talk or discussion?
Ma'am Chris, if I may.
Sige po, you are recognized din.
Isa rin, ewan ko kung tama ang aming concept of what we call sample size, because the sample size establishes also at the same time the representation of the actual respondents to the population. So halimbawa 250 siya, so technically ang actual respondents niya ay 249. So technically ang 249 ay it failed to represent the population. Kung yan ang reading namin, sir. Tama ba yun? It also measures the representation of the actual respondents to the population.
Okay. Your statement is correct. Particularly if you will be using the traditional method of estimating the sample size. Like for example, the use of, kung mas gagamit tayo na mas traditional, like the use of Cochrane, or for example, if we will be using sample size calculator like the use of Rausoff. Ang Rausoff po kasi nangangailangan siya ng population number, total population. So yung mga traditional sample size calculators natin and formula will assure us the representation ng population. Moreover, if we will be using advanced techniques like the use of G-Power and also the inverse square root and gamma exponential methods, these methods naman are more advanced because it does not rely on population but it relies on statistical tests. Ibig sabihin, it guarantees us that the results of the statistical tests are valid with this number of sample size. Okay? So there are two ways. One, we can establish the appropriateness ng ating sample size by calculating it traditionally. So when I say traditionally, by looking at the population in order for us to be assured that the number of sample size is a representation of the population. Or also establish our sufficiency of sample size by considering emerging approaches in estimating the sample size by identifying the statistical power through identification of the appropriate statistical test, and the software will calculate whether with the use of that statistical test enough na yung sample size. Okay, so dalawa pong approach yun. Yung first approach is on the population representation. Yung pangalawang approach is the appropriateness of statistical tests and the number of sample size. So either approach will work for a particular research study.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you po, Dean.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Okay, anyone pa po? Okay, you can message your question in our chat bot, or you may opt to unmute your microphone para diretso po kay Doc Lakap ang inyong mga questions or inquiries. Anyone po?
Hello, Sir Jean.
Hello, sir.
Sir Ronnie Ilian. Okay, you are recognized po, sir.
Thank you po. Tatanong ko lang po, since sa second sample niyo po na that you are not relying in the sample size of the respondents, pero still, di ba pag nag-estimate tayo, we still have to identify yung sample pa rin nung institution that we are going to gather the survey. So, paano po yun?
Actually, sir, remember in our data gathering, particularly sa pagsaset ng sample size natin, there are certain cases that we really do not know the population.
Yes, sir.
For example, magbigay po tayo ng example. Let's say, ang respondents natin, let's say, yung mga consumers or yung mga users ng isang brand ng sabon. Okay? Of course, let's say ganun yung study natin. This is only hypothetical. Users of a particular brand of soap. Of course, we do not really know ilan sila. Am I right? So kung po natin siya doon sa traditional, may hihirapan tayo kasi hindi natin malaman kung ilan yung population ng gumagamit ng isang particular brand of soap. Typically, kapag ganon ang case, it is much better that you use the emerging approach, which is, ano ba ang statistical test na gagamitin mo? From the statistical test, makakompute natin yung effect size, ano yung alpha level and statistical power based doon sa statistical test na gagamitin natin, at ikakalculate ng application or ng software yung sample size na needed for that type of research.
Okay, sir. Kasi mayroong mga institutions, sir, na they don't really give the actual population of their company. Yeah, they are treated as confidential pa rin daw.
Yeah,
Kaya nahihirapan tuloy yung mga estudyante ko na makakuha ng actual population size of the company.
Yeah. Actually, sir, kapag ganun yung situation, lalo na kasi, again, sabi ko nga, marami na tayong approach ngayon, emerging approach on how to estimate our size. Traditionally talaga po ang kinahanap natin is population kasi nga yung mga traditional approaches, ang minimum requirement nila para makompute yung sample size is the total population. But today kasi may mga emerging sample size calculation techniques na tayo wherein ang pinaka-recommended lang or a minimum requirement lang para makompute natin yung sample size is ano ba yung statistical test na gagamitin, ano ang gusto mo na alpha level, ano yung ang statistical power na kailangan mo. Okay, from there, makakalculate na po sila. Kaya usually, ang suggestion ko po, kapag ang population hindi ma-identify ng researcher, punta siya sa mga emerging calculations ng sample size like the use of G-power and inverse square root and gamma exponential method. Kasi if you will be reading po lahat ng mga published papers ngayon sa mga top journals, lalo na sa business, I notice most of them are using G-power and inverse square root and gamma exponential. Okay, kasi nga these are the newer techniques sa paggamit ng sample size. Seldom na lang ako nakakakita ngayon ng Cochrane, okay? Or yung rounds off, usually ginagamit din siya. But mostly sa mga top journals na nakikita ko sa mga nababasa ko, mostly they are using yung mga emerging techniques.
So palagay ko sir, ito yung ginagamit ng mga advertisers na ano.
Yeah, I agree.
Ayan, sir. So, thank you, sir.
Actually po yung mga emerging techniques natin sa pag-calculate or pag-estimate ng sample size, mukhang ano lang sila, ang tawag dito, mahirap kasi yung names nila, like for example, G power or inverse square root, mukhang technical sila. But if you will be studying them, sobrang dali na lang nilang gamitin because this is through the use of a software. So sa software mismo, ilalagay mo lang yung mga yung requirement ng software, then i-click mo siya, ika-calculate na niya for us yung sample size.
Thank you po again.
Okay, so Ma'am Des, I think is raising her hand. Yes, Ma'am Des, you are recognized po.
Hi po, good afternoon po.
Good
Can you
afternoon,
hear me,
ma'am.
sir? Okay po. Sir, ano lang po kasi na-observe ko lang din po kasi initially, di ba po, we always advise students to compute for the sample size. So they have to know the population po, or if the population is unknown, then we'll be giving them another formula din po for the unknown population. However po, ito lang naman din po yung na-observe ko na upon the estimation or computation of the sample size, and of course, di ba, nagbibigay din naman po sila ng excess. Kunyari, kung they only computed 385 na to be the sample size for this particular population po. Tapos, they distributed 400 questionnaires, kahit po 400 na na-distribute nila at na-retrieve nila, upon checking po, may mga rejected din, di ba, Doc, na questionnaire. So, hindi nila na-meet yung supposedly na 385. So, technically, di ba, sir, yung 385, ito yung acceptable number of respondents as representation of the population. So, if they weren't able to have the 385, more or less, kasi parang hindi ganun, parang hindi, yung yung nagiging conclusion niya, hindi siya representation ng population na yan. Pero sir, na-observe ko din nung mga dati pa naman po sa defense po, na in lieu of that, since they weren't able to get 385, kino-consider po sa retrieval rate naman, na parang pag over 85% naman yung nakuha niya, acceptable na rin daw po. Ano po ba, sir? Kasi syempre, pag tinuro natin, dapat 385 or more, kasi yun nga yung 385, yun yung pinaka-baseline natin. Thank you, Doc. Para po pag may nagtanong din sa akin, masasagot ko po.
Actually, Doc Des, your question is very valid kasi very important talaga yon, yung tinatag nating response rate or retrieval rate, and at the same time yung sufficiency of the sample size. Technically speaking, kapag for example, based sa example nyo kanina, Doc Des, yung 385, yun yung nakalculate na sample size, kailangan talaga ma-meet yun, whether she likes it or not, or he or she likes it or not. Kailangan ma-meet yun because that's the minimum sample size. It has nothing to do with response rate or retrieval rate. Kasi ang retrieval rate talaga yan, nakadepende siya kung tinapos ba ng respondent yung questionnaire o hindi niya. Kasi, di ba, merong instances, 2 pages, sinagot niya yung first page lang. Di ba? So, very important yung sample size. Okay? Yung minimum number of sample size. For example, magbigay lang po ako ng example. Last semester, I was given subject na research seminar 1 sa mga MBA. And one of the exercises meron kami is actually data collection. So we help them in calculating the sample size, and hindi ko pinaproceed. Okay, hindi kami nag-proceed sa statistical test unless na-meet nila yung minimum sample size. Okay? Bakit ganun? Kasi kahit na-i-proceed ko siya, kung hindi ka na-meet yung sample size, useless yung magiging result kasi kulang, hindi sufficient yung sample size. So we cannot claim that our results will be sound results. Even more so, hindi ko rin makiklaim or hindi namin makiklaim na yung conclusion sound siya kasi nga kulang ang sample size. So from the onset, bago pa natin i-process yung data ng mga estudyante, kailangan na-assured na tayo na yung minimum sample size na meet. Kung hindi na meet yung minimum sample size, huwag tayong mag-proceed sa pag-analyze ng data. Kasi masasayang lang yung effort eh. Ang dapat natin instruct next sa estudyante is she or he needs to gather more responses para ma-meet yung sample size.
Thank you, Doc. Okay. Doc, for enlightenment lang, masingit ko lang to. Kasi medyo na-confuse ako dito dun sa research designs natin na descriptive, correlational, and comparative. So my question, is there a possibility that even though the research paper, or rather the research design of the research students will be using descriptive, is there a chance or no chance that the study can have a hypothesis?
If the paper is purely descriptive, we will not have hypothesis. Kasi po ang hypothesis are only used for comparative and correlational.
Okay, thank you, Doc. All right, so I think at this juncture, may we have first a 10-minute break? Is it okay with you, Doc? Okay, Doc. Okay, so it's already 1:58. So let's just spare a 10-minute break to continue our session for this afternoon. Okay, sige po. Let's start our 10-minute break. Nakapag-CR break kahit pa paano, nakapag-coffee break. Okay, so I will give again the virtual floor to our speaker, Doc Laka.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So allow me to continue my presentation. Okay, so I'm done with the method section or the chapter 3 of the paper of the student. I think another important consideration then is this one kasi very important yung pag-design ng research instruments. There's also a proper way on how the student will design, of course through the help of the advisor, yung kanyang research instrument. Of course, our research instruments, this is our tool for our data gathering, and in most cases, ang research instrument natin is a survey. Kapag gagawa ang estudyante natin ng isang research instrument via survey, ano yung mga major considerations? So just to give you an idea, saan ba pumapasok yung pagdidesign ng isang research instrument? If you will be looking the research process, okay? If you will be looking the research process, di ba, as I mentioned, everything boils down with the identification of research gap. I mentioned in the morning session the importance of research gap, and one of its importance is we will be able to identify the possible contribution of our study. Okay, again, the purpose why we are doing study or a particular research undertaking is to add value, okay, to our specific field. When we talk about research gap, as I mentioned, this is our way to identify our possible research problem or research topic. Okay, so once na-establish natin yung research gap, once we identify the research gap and explain the reason why there is a need to address that gap, so na-identify na natin yung research problem or research topic, okay, ng study natin. From our research problem or research topic, this will be the time that you need to identify ano ba yung mga variables or constructs na i-measure natin. Ano ba yung mga variables or constructs na gusto nating hanapan? Let's say if you want to establish interrelationships of A, B, C, and D variables. Okay? So you need to establish dito kung ilan or ano yung mga variables na yon so that we have the idea kung anong sources ang gagamitin natin sa paggawa ng ating research instruments. Of course, once we identify our variables and our constructs, this will be the time that we will be establishing our theoretical underpinning, the hypothesis of the study, and our conceptual framework, which was also discussed a while ago. And of course, these parts will also aid in the identification of your research contribution. Now, from this research process, you will notice that in this part, in this section, dito natin ginagawa yung questionnaire. It means once you identified your variables or your constructs, this will be the time that you will be writing or establishing your questionnaire. Of course, a questionnaire is a written instrument to get informed or to get information from the participant and respondents of the study. Now, our questionnaire should be characterized by three. Okay, one, it should be relevant. Number two, it should be complete. And number three, it should be accurate. So these are the three characteristics that we need to establish also in our research instrument. But if I will be discussing the full process of designing an instrument, paano ba natin ginagawa fully ang ating research instruments? Okay, so as I mentioned, nag-start siya sa pag-identify ng ating constructs or variables. So if you still remember dito sa previous slide, dito sa pag-identify natin ng variables or constructs, this is the first step for us to establish our questionnaire. So ang unang step talaga natin is nandito sa aspect na to, dito sa aspect ng research process. Okay, so once we identify yung ating variables or constructs, there are two things that you need to consider. One, is there an existing instrument? Meron bang existing measurement na nagme-measure ng mga constructs mo? So let's say meron kang dalawang constructs. This is just an example. Let's say job satisfaction and organizational commitment. Because your study has something to do with the influence of job satisfaction to organizational commitment. So you need to ask yourself now, if I will be using job satisfaction and organizational commitment, is there an existing instrument or measurement for the two variables? Okay? If your answer is no, walang measurement, walang prior studies na nag-measure na ng job satisfaction and organizational commitment. Of course, this is only hypothetical. If there are no existing instrument or measurement on job satisfaction and organizational commitment, then you need to develop a new instrument. Ibig sabihin, you need to create your own instrument, okay, from the scratch. Okay? On the other hand, assuming your answer is yes, meron naman existing literature and published papers or prior studies na nagme-measure ng job satisfaction and organizational commitment. So this is the time now that you're going to check for the validity and reliability of the constructs. Since meron ng existing instrument or measurement, yung job satisfaction and organizational commitment, try to read muna, okay, yung mga studies na yon na meron ng measurement ng job satisfaction and organizational commitment, and check whether they were able to measure the validity and reliability of the constructs. Okay? Now, balikan natin ito. Assuming there is no existing instrument, okay? There's no existing instrument that measure job satisfaction and organizational commitment. As I mentioned, you need to develop a new instrument. And developing a new instrument will require you to perform factor analysis. Okay? So if you will be developing a new instrument, let's say maggagawa ka na sarili mong instrument to measure job satisfaction and organizational commitment kasi walang existing measurement for the two variables, then you need to perform factor analysis, because in factor analysis, you need to identify yung dimensionality, kung meron man dimensions, yung mga constructs, yung mga loadings nila, and so on and so forth. So basically, you will be perform factor analysis. Kung titingnan natin yung factor analysis, you can use exploratory factor analysis or EFA and confirmatory factor analysis or CFA. EFA and CFA are utilized to perform factor analysis, and statistics po yan. Okay, statistics pa rin yan. So meron din software na pwedeng tumulong sa atin sa pag-perform ng factor analysis. Balikan naman natin dito kung ang sagot is yes, as I mentioned, if there is an existing instrument that measure job satisfaction and organizational commitment, basahin muna natin yung mga papers na yon. Then check kung meron siyang validity and reliability test na ginamit. Okay? Kapag na-verify na natin na yung prior studies na yon, na-check niya yung validity and reliability ng job satisfaction and organizational commitment, this is the time that we will be designing our instrument. Okay, gagawa na tayo ng design ng instrument natin. In designing your instrument, you need to take note of the following. Number one, check the dimensionality of the constructs. Tingnan mo kung yung construct mo may dimension or wala, because it has something to do also with validity and reliability. Okay, I think tomorrow I will be discussing more on that, the dimensionality of the constructs. Number two, identify the items for each construct. Ilang items ang nagme-measure ng job satisfaction? Ilang items ang nagme-measure ng organizational commitment? Try to read each of this item or each of this indicator. Tingnan mo kung appropriate sila kung gagamitin mo sa setting mo. Kasi for example, posible na yung job satisfaction and organizational commitment ang setting namin niya, let's say banking industry niya ginamit. So mineasure niya yung level ng job satisfaction and organizational commitment ng mga employees sa mga banks. Pero let's say yung sayo, BPO companies or BPO industry. So try to read yung mga items kung yung mga items na yon related siya or relevant siya sa context na meron ng study mo. Okay, so that's number two. And number three, you need to establish now your questionnaire format and yung length. Okay, paano ang yung questionnaire? Ano yung pagkakasunod ng questionnaire mo? Are you going to ask for the demographic profile? Are you going to have let's say a 2-page questionnaire? Depende yan. But today, of course, because we are still in the era of pandemic, usually ang pinapagamit natin ngayon is via online. So we need to format also our questionnaire based on the online format. Let's say kung gagamit tayo ng Google Form. Okay? And very important din yung length. Okay? Kasi one of the major considerations din natin is yung time na ibibigay ng respondent sa pagsagot ng ating questionnaire. Okay? So once na na-design mo na, let's say natapos mo nang magawan, okay, yung instrument mo, this is the time that you will be performing phase and content validity. Okay, what is phase and content validity? Ano yung purpose ng phase and content validity? The purpose of phase and content validity is just to check whether yung ginawa mong instrument is okay or not. Typically, ano ba ang chine-check dyan? Chine-check sa phase and content validity ng mga experts, okay, kung yung mga items are good items to measure a particular construct or a particular latent construct. Okay? Tinitingnan din natin, typically, dito na rin natin pinapasok yung pag-check whether tama ba yung pagka-state ng mga items, grammatically sound ba sila, grammatically correct ba sila, kailangan ba, meron bang translation yan ng Filipino or okay lang na English ang instrument natin. So dyan pumapasok yan, yung phase and content validity. Okay? So tawag natin sa stage na yan, okay, yung pag-design ng instrument and performing phase validity, nasa pre-testing phase tayo. Okay? Then, once, let's say, na-establish na yung phase and content validity, we need to perform now reliability and validity tests. Okay? In performing reliability and validity tests, dito na pumapasok yung pag-measure ng reliability for Cronbach's alpha, reliability tests via Cronbach's alpha or composite reliability, particularly for reflective constructs. And of course, in terms of validity, meron tayong convergent and discriminant validity. So kapag na-prove na natin that our constructs, okay, are both reliable and valid, that would be the time na mag-full gather na tayo ng data. Okay? If you will be looking at it, this is the right way on how we will be designing our research instrument. Hindi lang siya basta-basta na gumawa ang estudyante ng instrument, then that's it. Okay? So we really need we really need to find time to evaluate kung tama yung naging proseso sa paggawa ng research instrument. Okay? So tawag naman pala natin sa aspect na yan yung tinatawag nating pilot testing. Okay? So sa pag-design ng research instrument natin, meron tayong dalawang phases na actually nag-undergo ang estudyante. That is the pre-testing phase. And yung pangalawa is pilot testing. So kapag pumasa na siya sa reliability and validity test, doon tayo mag-float ng questionnaire sa maramihan. So kung ang target mo is 385, doon mo i-float ang questionnaire mo hanggang ma-achieve mo ang minimum sample size. Okay? This is the process of developing a research instrument. Okay? In our research questionnaire, meron tayong dalawang method kung paano tayo pwede mag-gather ng data. One is what we call interviewer administered. Number two is what we call self-administered. Ano yung difference ng dalawang yan? When we talk about interviewer administered, it is a type of questionnaire method wherein kapag sinagutan ng respondent, kailangan meron siyang assistance from the researcher or from the data gatherer. Ibig sabihin, habang sinasagot ng respondent yung questionnaire, meron naka-standby na interviewer, quote-unquote, or yung data collector natin in cases na hindi niya maintindihan kung ano yung pinapasagot mo sa kanya. Okay? On the other hand, we also have what we call self-administered questionnaire. Ano naman yung self-administered questionnaire? It means you simply float the questionnaire at bahala na si respondent sa pagsagot ng questionnaire na yon. Typically, ito yung ginagamit ng mga estudyante natin, self-administered. Very crucial lang sa self-administered questionnaire yung mga instruction. Dapat clear. Okay, sa questionnaire natin, yung mga instruction. Kasi usually for self-administered questionnaire, ang ginagawa lang ng respondent is nagtitik or nag-check ng mga boxes. Okay, for example, tatanungin mo, what is their gender, male or female? What is their income level? What is their age? So, chine-check lang nila. Tapos, kung Likert form yung mga constructs mo, like for example, job satisfaction, nag-check lang sila kung strongly agree, and so on and so forth. Okay? So very crucial yung method mo kung self-administered. Kailangan very clear yung mga instruction mo. Okay? Now, in designing a research instrument, as I always mention, tatlo ang posibleng mangyari dyan. Adapt with O, it means you will be doing an instrument nearly verbatim from the source or from the adapted source or sources. Number two, it can be adapt with A. It means you will be adapting with A yung mga prior studies kasi nga may existing, but you're going to alter the instrument significantly. And of course, develop naman, it means you're going to do an instrument from the scratch. Like for example, kung wala talagang measurement do sa variable na gusto mong i-measure. Okay? So these are the three things na pwede na these are the three things sa pagdi-design ng research instruments. Sa pag-design ng research instrument natin, whether you will be doing adapt with O, adapt with A, or develop, kailangan natin pag-aralan yung different types of constructs or variables. Okay? Very important in designing a research instrument of what type of variables or constructs we will be using, okay, in our research instrument. Okay? So for example, kung mag-a-adapt tayo, let's say you will be adapting with O, okay, it means you will be getting merong existing measurement na from prior studies, then you're going to use that nearly verbatim. Okay? Kailangan pa rin natin malaman kung anong type of variable yung gusto nating i-measure. Okay? So magbigay lang ako ng example. So this is an example where, for example, dito we want to measure CSR engagements. Okay? In-screenshot ko to from prior studies, and in the prior studies, may nakita ako na meron ng items that measure CSR engagement. In this original source, 5 items, 5 indicators ng CSR engagement, corporate social responsibility engagement. And based do sa published paper, galing daw mga items na to kay Klein and Dawar in 2004 and Brown and Dassin in 1997. Okay? So you will see here, meron siyang 5 items. Okay? Yung CSR engagement at ang context ng study is bank. Okay? Let's assume you will be doing a similar study, CSR engagement din ang i-measure mo. And you want to utilize these 5 items to measure CSR engagement. But this time, ang context mo would be TV network. Okay? So ang gagawin mo ngayon is you can now adapt, okay, these items from these 2 authors. So pwede mong i-adapt yan, but of course, you will not be using bank anymore kasi hindi bank ang context mo. Instead, you will be using TV network. So you can adapt now this 5. Okay, same lang yung pagkakasulat. Okay, same lang, pinalitan mo lang yung context. Okay, TV network. This is an example of adapting a questionnaire. This is the easiest and this is what I usually advise. to my advices. Why? Because this is the easiest. Okay? Kasi meron ng existing instrument. Okay? So all we need to do is refine the instrument para mag-tailor fit siya dun sa context na pinag-aaralan ng estudyante. Okay? So this is an example of adapting a questionnaire. Okay. Now, in formulating our research instruments, okay, one thing that you need to know is basically yung difference ng observed and unobserved variables or observed and unobserved constructs. Okay, kapag sinabi nating observed variables, it is also called manifest variables. These are variables that are directly measured. Like for example, you want to know the gender, the marital status, and age of the respondents. These are examples of variables that are considered observed. Why? Because they can be directly measured. Okay? So typically, ano ba yung mga manifest variable natin? Yun yung nasa demographics. Okay? Kasi directly measured yan. Okay? So pwede nating ma-measure yan directly. Okay? On the other hand, we also have what we call unobserved variables. Okay? Or also called latent variables. Latent variables are variables that cannot be measured directly. Okay, for example, you want to measure job satisfaction or organizational commitment or intention to quit or grit. Okay, of course, we cannot directly measure them. Walang direct measurement sa mga ito. We can only quantify, okay, these latent variables or unobserved variables by using a scale. Okay, for example, gagamit ka let's say ng 5-point Likert scale dito sa job satisfaction. Okay, para ma-measure natin yung level ng satisfaction ng respondents natin. Same is true with organizational commitment, intention to quit, or grit. So these are examples of what we call unobserved variables or latent variables. Okay? Magbigay tayo ng example. So this is an example of observed variables. Like for example, you want to identify whether the respondent is a CCA student or an employee. Or for example, if it is a student, anong year level nila? Or if they are employees, ilang years na sila sa isang institution. Let's say you want to measure kung ilan yung babae, ilan yung lalaki, ano yung age nila. So tawag natin dyan observed variables. Okay? Next, we also have what we call unobserved variables. When we talk about unobserved variables, these are variables that cannot be directly measured. So for example, gusto natin malaman yung level ng customer satisfaction. Let's say meron kang 3 items. Okay, let's say adapted ito. So itong 3 items na to, measured siya using 5-point Likert scale. Okay, another is consumer return on investment. Meron kang 2 items. Then behavioral intentions, meron kang 3 items. Okay, so these are examples of what we call unobserved variables. Para maging quantifiable sila, gumagamit tayo ng scale para ma-measure natin sila ng tama. Okay, so tawag natin dyan unobserved variables. Now, siguro bukas ko i-discuss ko to, medyo mahaba kasi to. Okay? One thing that I want to emphasize also here, kasi I also experienced last time, there are times that there are panel members during defense. Okay? Na-observe ko lang ito ha. This is only a personal experience. There are some panel members that will require the students nasasabihin nila kapag nakita nila na yung items sa isang construct, like for example, let's say this one, consumer return on investments. Let's say 2 lang ang nakita nilang items. Sasabihin ng panel member, masyadong konti to measure yung consumer return on investment. Kailangan mong dagdagan. Okay? Remember, in designing an instrument, you cannot simply alter or, for example, increase the number of indicators, lalo na kung adapted yan. Okay? If, for example, you're going to fully alter everything, for example, let's say, this is just an example. You want to measure consumer return on investment, and let's say ang source mo dyan is lockup 2017. Okay, galing kay lockup 2017 because in 2017 lockup measured consumer return on investment, and based sa questionnaire niya 2 lang talaga ang item ng consumer return on investment. Okay? And let's say ginamit mo yung consumer return on investment in your study because that is one of the constructs that you want to measure. Pwede mo ba siyang dagdagan? If you will be adding it, you need to subject yourself again to factor analysis. Kasi ina-alter mo na, okay, yung mga dimensionality and indicators, okay, ng consumer return on investment. So you need to prove muna na yung additional items na yon are items that really measure consumer return on investment. And yung proper way to do it is you go back again with factor analysis. Okay? So hindi natin basta-basta ina-alter, dinadagdagan ang isang construct ng items dahil gusto natin. Actually, if you will be reading published papers, there are also questionnaire or there are also constructs na ang number of items na isa. Okay? And they are acceptable. Okay? It means isang item lang siya or isang indicator that measure a particular latent construct. If, for example, sasabihin natin mali yun, we need to have a proof. But if you will be looking published papers on that, a single item construct can stand alone as a latent construct. And there were already studies that already proved that even a construct with single item can still be utilized, okay, in data collection. Okay? So kailangan alam din natin ito kasi hindi lang basta-basta na nag-a-add tayo. Okay? Kasi meron din proper way on add. Hindi lang siya basta na sinabi natin magdagdag ka kasi kulang. But the question kasi dito, paano natin nalaman na kulang? Is it because nakita natin konti? Dahil kulang, feeling mo kulang na siya? At does it mean kapag marami, enough na siya? Again, you always go back yung result ng ating factor load ng factor analysis. Kung yun yung idea natin ng pagbawas or pagdagdag ng ating items, ating questionnaire. Okay? So I think that would be the end of my presentation this afternoon. If you have any questions so far, kasi tomorrow I will be continuing with this one kasi medyo mahaba pa to. I will be sharing with you yung other aspects pa that we need to consider sa pag-develop and pag-design ng ating research instruments. Okay, so I'll stop here first this one, and if you have any question regarding my presentation, pwede na po tayong magtanong.
Okay, as we hear Doc Lakap, he will be entertaining questions from the participants. So sino po yung may mga queries or questions? So pwede pong i-chat sa Zoom chat box natin at the same time. You can unmute para po diretso nating itanong kay VP Lakap. Anyone? Overwhelmed na ata sila, Doc, sa although hindi buong araw na discussion nyo, pero talagang abundance of knowledge na naman talaga when it comes to the research field. Alright, meron po ba?
Sir, pwede po magtanong.
Okay, Sir Ethan, you are recognized po to ask question.
Okay, thank you. Sir, yung, di ba yung sa adaptive na sinasabi nyo kanina, if this is the case that the student will be adapting the entire questionnaire, is there still a need for reliability and validity test?
Okay, if you will be adapting with O, ibig sabihin nearly verbatim, you still need to measure the validity and reliability of the construct, lalo na kung reflective yan. Okay? Kasi meron tayong dalawang klase ng construct, reflective and formative. Tomorrow I will be explaining more on that. But validity and reliability are very important even though ang gagamitin natin is adapting a questionnaire with O. Okay, bakit natin kailangan? Most probably, sir, ang nasa isip natin, adapt na nga natin previously na-prove na valid and reliable na siya. Bakit pa tayo nagtitest ng validity and reliability? We need to bear in mind that the respondents na ginamit ng original author are different from the respondents na meron tayo. Okay? So there is also possibility na magkakaroon ng differences dun sa level ng validity and reliability. Ito yung sinasabi ko na pumapasok yung cultural factors. Kasi posible na yung sumagot dun sa unang questionnaire kung saan natin in-adapt are, for example, Americans. Ngayon, gagamitin natin siya sa context ng Philippines. So Filipino ang respondents natin. And posible magkaiba. Okay, posible na magkaiba ang mga responses. That's the reason we still need to measure validity and reliability even though ang mode natin is adopting an instrument.
Thank you, sir. Kasi ganun ginagawa nung before yung mga na 80s and 90s research, kapag nag-adaptive, hindi na nila pinapa-validity test. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you po.
Okay, thank you very much for Ian. Any questions pa po from the participant? Okay, I think Dr. Aki Matias would like to ask something. Yes, go on, Sir Aki, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Doc Jean Paulo. I would like to ask lang po, paano po ang process ng validity at saka reliability ng isang qualitative research instrument?
Okay. Of course, iba yung sa qualitative, hindi siya statistical. Ang usual na ginagamit natin for qualitative is nasa phase and content validity. Okay, wala tayong wala tayong statistical as a part sa pag-validate ng isang qualitative questionnaire. Kasi ang qualitative questionnaire is basically in a form of an interview. So dapat meron kang interview guide. Kung focus group discussion yan, meron ka ding questions sa focus group. And yung mga items mo or yung questions mo that will be raised during for example, the focus group discussion or maybe a semi-structured interview kasi one-on-one interview yung gagamitin mo as your tool, kailangan yung mga questions na yon na validate yan ng expert din. So for example, kung gagawa ka ng study about, this is just an example, the living standard of people living in a slum area. Okay, and let's say ang gagamitin natin is focus group discussion kasi nag-invite ka ng mga certain family members ng community ng slum area and gusto mo lang malaman ano ba yung pamumuhay nila. Of course, you're going to prepare yung mga questions mo for your focus group discussion. And yung questions na yun can be validated by those people who are expert in the field. Sino ba yung expert kapag ang pinag-aaralan natin is slum area? So maybe you can identify somebody na nasa arts and sciences or hindi ko alam anong klaseng field yon or anything na expert dun sa field na yun. Yung mga items mo hindi sila neutral sila. Okay, number 2, kailangan nating i-consider also na hindi offensive yung mga questions. Okay? Yun ang mga major considerations naman natin for qualitative questionnaires.
Maraming salamat po, Doc.
Yes, okay. It's more on ethical consideration talaga that really matters when you do qualitative research because that really involves people na mag-i-immerse ka. Okay, thank you.
Very
Sir
important
Aki.
yun, Prof. For example, kung ang mga respondents mo, indigenous people, mas mahirap yung validity nun. Kasi talagang tinitingnan kasi nila kasi baka yung mga question mo discriminatory sila or question siya na negative masyado yung question. Yun, kailangan natin i-verify yun. Kaya pinapa-face and content validity muna natin yung mga questions na ito-throw natin for qualitative key research.
Before you ask them, Doc, kailangan nag-underwent na siya doon sa phase and content validity.
Yes.
Before.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarification. All right. Anyone pa else? Anyone pa po from the participants? Okay. Dr. Aki would like again to ask question.
Pasensya na, Doc Jean Paulo. I would like to ask lang po, paano po ba natin ginagawa yung factor analysis kapag tayo ay gumagawa ng sarili nating construct or research instrument?
Okay. For factor analysis, ano din yan, statistical din yan. You can, actually, ako ang ginagamit ko is Jamovi kapag nagfa-factor analysis ako. Pero seldom kong ginagamit ang factor analysis simply because medyo tedious siya compared with other statistical tests. Just to give you the idea, okay? Sa factor analysis, ang minimum data gathering mo is 2 beses. Kasi sa unang first data gathering mo, kailangan mong explore yung mga tawag natin exploratory factor analysis. We need to explore yung dimensionality, yung loadings nila. Okay, tinitingnan natin kung pumapasok sila sa thresholds. Yon. Okay, after mo kasing mag-undergo ng exploratory factor analysis, so i-adjust mo na naman yung items mo to measure a particular construct, tapos i-float mo na naman siya. Okay? Then, i-confirm mo naman siya ngayon. Mag-undergo na naman siya ng confirmatory factor analysis. Sa confirmatory factor analysis, establish na natin dyan yung validity and reliability. Hanggang hindi natin nakukuha yung mga thresholds or nami-meet yung mga requirements, hindi tayo tumitigil. Kaya ang lagi ko sinasabi, kung gusto niyo na medyo madugo, mag-factor analysis kayo. Kasi medyo madugo ang data gathering niyan. Sobrang madugo. As I mentioned, minimum 2 beses. Minimum yun ha. Kasi doon sa minimum na yon, ang assumption natin sa pangalawa okay na. Sa pangalawang data gathering. Kasi there are times, pangatlo, hindi pa rin siya nakukuha, pang-apat, doon pa lang siya pumapalo doon sa mga requirements. Kaya medyo madugo ang factor analysis. Usually, like for example, in other universities, kapag gumawa ang isang estudyante ng bagong construct, kasi walang existing measurement yung construct na yon, dissertation na kaagad yon. The process of developing a scale, developing a new scale is a dissertation itself. Kasi nga yung process niya, tedious and scientific pa rin yung process niya. So tawag natin doon is factor analysis.
Follow-up question lang po, Doc. Bali doon sa factor analysis na yon, ano po ba yung normal na threshold na dapat naming makita once we run for factor analysis?
Actually, sir, hindi lang siya marami sila. Kasi una, tinitingnan mo muna yung dimensionality, titingnan mo yung mga loadings niya, ini-examine mo kung meron bang items na magkakapareho para mag-create siya ng isang dimension. So medyo marami siya. Kung i-discuss natin siya, medyo mahaba siya. But statistics pa rin ang ginagamit natin to perform factor analysis. Hindi lang siya kasi katulad ng for example, kung validity and reliability. Let's say kung sa reliability, kapag pinalitaw ni Cronbach's alpha yung coefficient, yun na yun. In factor analysis, hindi siya ganon. So, process talaga siya. Iba-iba siyang process para makuha natin yung tamang items that will really measure the new construct. Yun yung tinatawag natin factor analysis.
All right, thank you so much po, Doc, for the answer. Nalinawan na po ako. Salamat.
Okay. Thank you then, Sir Aki, for the question. And Dr. Blanco has have comments, should I say. Sir, would you recommend that aside from validity and reliability testing, the instrument should also be checked grammatically? So, question pala ito. Or question po ito, sir. Yung isa kasi comment.
Okay, for the question ni Ma'am Des, aside sa validity and reliability, kailangan ba check yung grammar? My answer is yes. Pwede na natin isama actually doon sa phase and content validity stage. So kailangan chine-check na natin yung grammar. Kung of course ang assumption ko dito English yung ating English yung instrument natin. Kung naman kailangan ng translation, for example, ang respondents natin hindi talaga sila nakakaintindi ng English or nahihirapan silang umintindi ng English instruments, meron din tayong process sa tamang pag-translate. Tomorrow i-discuss ko siya. Hindi lang siya automatic na ipapatranslate mo siya sa Filipino. Meron din siyang scientific process actually. Okay, ito yung tinatawag nating questionnaire translation. Tomorrow, i-discuss ko yung steps niya. Hindi lang siya basta na English, ipapatagalog mo siya sa isang Filipino teacher. Hindi siya ganon. Medyo madugo din yung translation process. Tomorrow, I will be discussing more on that.